Welcome to the Maclean's Town Hall with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We're here at Canada's National Arts Centre in Ottawa. This is his first Town Hall-style meeting with Canadian voters since his extraordinary election victory in October, and the Prime Minister is here for an hour. I'm Paul Wells, the political editor of Maclean's magazine. At first, he's going to take questions from myself and from some of my colleagues at other Rogers publications, but for most of the time here, the questions will come from our live audience and from Canadians across the country. And there are already a lot of questions. So, Prime Minister, thank you for accepting our invitation. Let's get down to it.
My pleasure.
We haven't spoken since October 19th when you won. I want to ask, first of all, about the tempo of your government's operations. One of your predecessors, Lester Pearson, campaigned on 60 days of decision. And on the 59th day, his finance minister submitted his resignation. Saturday will be the 60th day since the election. So far, Bill Morneau, your finance minister, seems to be okay. But one hears around town a lot of people saying that you're taking things rather quickly. You've started all your reforms at once. Do you worry sometimes that you've bitten off more than you can chew?
Actually, Canadians told us very clearly over the past few years the kinds of things they needed action on, particularly around growing the economy, and we made a very serious commitment to start off in the very first act in Parliament to lower taxes for the middle class, and that's exactly what we did. On other issues, we made very clear commitments to move forward rapidly on bringing in 25,000 Syrian refugees and needing Canadians' support and involvement to do that, and that's what we ramped up right away. And the international calendar dictated that climate change would be at the top of everyone's international engagement list, and we moved on that. There's an awful lot more to come, and one of the things that I have been particularly grateful for in the opening round, I guess, of this mandate is that we have an extraordinary team of amazing ministers who I've been able to say, get started on this, start rolling on that, start consulting and acting on this, and they go and do it. And I'm able to watch a whole bunch of people do amazing things and help them where necessary.
Folks in my line of work have been watching to see signs of slippage and things that might not be working out as well because we're a cranky lot. And already there's signs that campaign commitment to $10 billion in deficits is not going to be met. How much, I mean, once you decide that you're not going to cap your deficits, how much bigger can they go? And will you still be able to meet the electorate in 4 years with a balanced budget? Well,
the commitment we made was to create growth for an economy that, quite frankly, hadn't had growth that it needs in quite a while. I mean, as you may have heard me say a few times during the election campaign, Stephen Harper had the worst record on growth of any prime minister since R.B. Bennett in the depths of the Great Depression. So we put forward as a commitment to Canadians that we weren't going to stress about balancing the budget immediately, which both Mr. Harper and Mr. Mulcair did. We were going to focus on investing in Canada to make that growth happen and to help the middle class directly. We said that we proposed modest deficits, that we were hoping to have around $10 billion or less, but we would be open with Canadians about how things were looking once we actually got into place. The one commitment we did make was to recognize that Canada has a low debt to GDP ratio and is getting lower, and we were going to ensure that it kept getting lower every year through our mandate, and that's what we're holding to.
Okay. If it's reasonable to run deficits now as long as you're under that debt to GDP cap, why not keep running them right through to the end of the mandate?
Well, you know, we understand that what we need is to demonstrate at the same time a level of fiscal responsibility as we're creating that growth. So investing record numbers in infrastructure, in public transit, in green innovation and infrastructure, the kinds of things that we know are going to create jobs now and growth over the long term is what Canadians asked us to do, and that's what we're focused on. But I also think it's also realistic to not just decide that, oh, deficits or discipline doesn't matter. We've committed to balance that budget by the last year of our mandate because we do need to keep things responsible, because Liberal governments have always been responsible.
You're also getting advice from some economists to reverse the GST cuts of your predecessor. They say that GST should never have been cut that much in the first place. Might as well bring those revenues back. Is that something you're contemplating?
No, it's not. As we've said many times, our plan is to lower taxes for the reduce taxes for the middle class, and that's what we're focused on.
Okay. I could go on all afternoon, but I'm going to get chances to come and ask you questions as the afternoon proceeds. So I'm going to hand it off now to two of my colleagues from other Rogers publications. We have here from Chatelaine Magazine, Rachel Giza, who's a editor-at-large at Chatelaine, and I'm going to ask Rachel to ask you some questions now.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you for speaking to Chatelaine and its readers. You've made very big promises to Indigenous communities in Canada, and you have committed to a total renewal in Canada's relationship with First Nations. You've met with the AFN, you've met with members of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but previous governments in this country have made big promises to Indigenous communities before and have not followed through. So to use the words of Minister Bennett, what are the concrete actions we can expect to see in the next 4 years on Indigenous issues?
Well, actually, I'm going to start by pointing out that, yes, previous governments made commitments, but they also followed through on them. The Kelowna Accord was a landmark agreement that involved a substantive, measurable series of investments along priorities set out by First Nations, Métis Nation, and Inuit communities. So in a meeting I had this morning with leaders of 5 of the major Indigenous organizations across this country, we talked about how we pick up where Kelowna got cut off 10 years ago and substantially invest. What it means concretely, a national public inquiry into the ongoing tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Action on all 94 of the recommendations coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, including ensuring that school kids across the country learn about the mistakes and the failings of past governments. But also moving forward on closing the gap between investments in education in Indigenous communities versus investments in education for non-Aboriginal kids. There's a huge inequality there, and Canada's supposed to be a fair country. Also issues like moving forward on infrastructure, whether it's all the boil water advisories on far too many Indigenous communities across the country that we need to address. So there are a lot of very measurable, tangible things we're moving forward on infrastructure, on education, on health, that as we laid out this morning, some of them are going to take more than a year or even a mandate to do. We're talking about setting in place things for decades and even generations, but getting right now to the kinds of actions that are making up for lost time is essential.
Your family's childcare arrangements made the news last month and caused a bit of a stir. And it also highlighted the fact that for a lot of Canadians, finding good quality care for their children is a huge struggle. So what I wanted to know, what's your commitment to ensuring that kids have high quality childcare, high quality early childhood education? And also, what's the federal government's responsibility to ensure that the people who do the work of childminding and educating children, the bulk of whom are women, receive a fair wage?
Well, we made significant commitments around social infrastructure in the campaign. We talked about a $20 billion investment over 10 years, which includes things like social housing and childcare spaces. But as the Liberal Party discovered years ago, when we negotiated landmark childcare agreements with all 10 provinces, you need to coordinate with the provinces. Some provinces need more spaces. Some provinces would like to increase the quality of childcare. Some provinces would like to reduce the cost of childcare. And there are different needs right across the country. And what I certainly feel is that it's not up to the federal government to dictate in areas of social policy. Indeed, constitutionally, it's not our responsibility or our ability to do that. But to work with the provinces and provide the funding for their priorities. So that's what we're going to do on the childcare side. But also, we've committed to bringing in a Canada Child Benefit that is significantly more generous than the monthly checks that families get now. Right now, they're taxable, so at tax time, people are going to get dinged for the big checks they received last summer. We're not going to do that. We're going to give substantially more money every month that doesn't get clawed back at tax time, that will be more generous for low-income families and families in the middle class, but won't send it to the wealthiest families.
Do I have time for one more, Paul?
You bet.
Okay. I want to pick up on something that Paul had mentioned earlier, which is the pace of these first couple of months of your government and your own personal pace. This has been an unprecedented access to you and visibility. You have taken selfies. You have appeared in the media. Last night, you went to a screening of Star Wars with a group of kids from the Children's Hospital here. and I understand it's been very delightful, and I think very.
Sorry, everyone in the room is going, he actually saw Star Wars? I know you can't just drop that.
My question is, what happened? Tell us all that. No.
I can't tell you what happened, but oh, it's so good. And see it early before no one else spoils it for you. See it as soon as you can. It's so good. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. I knew we'd get you off track with that one. So it's been delightful to watch, and I understand that this is part of your image and the image of your party. But what I want to understand is, how is this charm offensive the right tone for Canada's government right now?
It's not about image. It's about substance, and that's what so many of my political opponents haven't understood. That if you want to serve Canadians well with the kinds of things that they want to see for themselves, for their families, for their future, you have to listen to them. You have to get to know people. You have to be engaged in real conversations and talking about their hopes and dreams for the country, and find out what's worrying them, what's going well, where they need a little extra help, what's preoccupying them. That capacity to lead is not just to respond to what polls are, what people are saying is priority. It's understanding where people's concerns are and then bringing them to a place where we're actually dealing with those. And that's where, whether it's talking to a broad range of publications in a lot of different ways, where we can actually connect with people who might not get a lot of politics in their daily reading or news, is a really important thing. So the more I can stay connected with people, the less I run the risk that prime ministers run of getting disconnected from the very people you're supposed to serve.
In that spirit of talking to different publications, Prime Minister, and with thanks for that spoiler-free answer on the Star Wars question, we're going to go to my colleague Alex Castonguay. Alex Castonguay est le chef du bureau politique du magazine L'Actualité.
He's from the Actualité magazine. He's here to ask you a couple of questions. Hello, Mr. Trudeau. Thank you for taking part in this exercise with the public. This conversation organised by Maclean's. Concerning the tax cut that you announced last week, we've heard you talk about tax cuts for the middle class a lot, but those that will benefit the most in reality are those that earn a very high income. Why exclude those that earn less than $40,000 per annum? Well, the fact of the matter is, when you want to bring in tax cuts on various taxation brackets, well, the first couple of brackets benefit everyone, in fact. This is a tool that, roughly speaking, will help everybody across the board. We want this tax bracket from $45,000 to $89,000 to receive a tax break to the tune of 1.5%. This will make a tangible difference in the lives of these Canadians. Now, at the same time, we have known that for some years, the top 1% of Canadians have succeeded very, very well. So to ask them just a little bit, for just a little bit more, is one way of achieving this broader distribution. Now, that's not the only help we're going to be giving to the middle class and those who wish to join the middle class. We've also invested heavily in the Canada Child Benefit. This will be in our first budget. It'll give more money to 9 out of every 10 families in Canada and will not provide additional benefits for the most wealthy Canadians. It'll lift tens of thousands of Canadians out of poverty across Canada. And this is part of the swag of initiatives that we are putting into place. So right now, those earning less than $45,000 won't benefit from any tax break, and yet they're in need. Well, yes, there are many people who don't pay any taxes and earn less than $45,000 per annum. We're looking for a tool to specifically help the middle class. Obviously, people always need a helping hand, a little bit more, but there are tools to help those in distress and in difficulty. For far too long, we've neglected middle-class families, and yet it's middle-class families who generate the most economic activity in Canada. We need to give them confidence, and as far as the environment is concerned, Karen Prudhomme raised this issue. We've just come out of COP21 on climate change. We've heard you previously talk a lot about wanting to export national resources, including oil and is this fly in the face of what it was decided in Paris? Because there's going to be a significant reduction in our carbon footprint. Well, truth be told, everyone knows we need jobs. Everyone knows that we need economic growth. But this must not come at the expense of the future of our children and the sustainability of our environment. We need to strike a balance, and this balance has been mismanaged for the past decade. The previous government wasn't able to implement a pipeline to export our natural resources because Canadians didn't trust that it would be done in a responsible fashion. We know through the Paris Accord that in upcoming years we're going to be less and less reliant on fossil fuels and carbon. We want to be part of the solution. We are going to help to transition Canada to an era without reliance on oil. But in order to do this, we need to move ahead at a pace that will enable Canadian families to be able to pay their rent, heat their houses and apartments. So this will be a balanced transition, and that's necessary. What about Energy East? It's taking oil from the tar sands to export it to the maritime provinces and abroad. Does that fit in with your long-term vision for the environment and for Canada's economy? Well, the truth is that it's up to Canadians to decide what should be done. The onus is on the government to establish a clear process through which Canadians can decide whether or not they wish to support such and such a project. There'll be jobs created through this pipeline project. But there's also environmental concerns. And can those two aspects be reconciled? And if they can be, Canadians will be open to such projects. But the onus is on the government to demonstrate that we're concerned about striking a balance and about our long-term future and reducing our reliance on oil. When it comes to federalism, you know, most of the provinces are running deficits. There are huge needs when it comes to an ageing population, healthcare, education. Our nation needs to innovate. How can you help the provinces to fulfil their mandates and to meet the demands? Can the federal government increase transfer payments? Well, it's not just a question of money. We know that full well. It's a question of creating a better partnership so that these issues can be addressed. Some provinces have best practices that others have not yet adopted. There are solutions that governments, international governments, are suggesting. Of course, provinces have to respect their areas of jurisdiction when it comes to delivery of services, and that's why we have earmarked $3 billion for home care across Canada. It's in a spirit of collaboration and respect that we're proceeding. A real partnership, something that we haven't had for quite some time that we're providing the provinces. Do you think that there's a fiscal imbalance in our federation currently? There's always issues that need to be taken into account. Some provinces say there is one, others don't say there isn't. We need to unite Canadians so that we have the means to achieve what we need to do. Thank you, Prime Minister, for your answers to these questions.
Always got a lot of questions for you, but I know the folks in the audience do too. And so to help get through those questions, as well as questions that were submitted online by Canadians across the country, we have City News political specialist Cynthia Mulligan, and she's going to ask some folks in the audience to ask the Prime Minister their questions. Cynthia?
Prime Minister, we had a lot of questions on social media, and one of the dominant themes concerned Syria. It was asked right across the country, and here's a question from a City News viewer in Toronto. His name is Wayne. He asks, please help me understand why you are taking the CF-18 fighter jets out of the war on ISIS. So far, all I have heard is what you are going to do, but I would like to understand why.
It's a great question. Thank you, Wayne, for the question. The fact is, everyone understands that the so-called Islamic State are terrorists who want to destabilize the region, kill anyone who disagrees with them, and pose real threats to the Western world specifically. Canada has an important responsibility as part of the coalition to fight against the Islamic State militants, and to establish a level of peace and security in that region. What people understand well is there is no purely military solution. You cannot defeat ISIS by military means alone. We need a broad way of engaging, and that means humanitarian support. It means supporting on refugees, as we have started to do significantly. But it also does include military engagement. There's no question about it. And the question that we have to ask as a government and as a country is, how best can we help? There's no question that the men and women of the Canadian Forces are extraordinarily skilled and brave and able to do whatever mission we send them in on, as they are doing right now in airstrikes. But the question becomes, are airstrikes, is a combat role the best way for Canada to actually help? Now, for 10 years, we spent an awful lot of time gaining hard-fought experience in Afghanistan about training up local troops to be able to bring the fight directly to terrorists in their communities, in their towns. And we know that Western armies engaged in combat is not necessarily the way to solve challenges in the Middle East. So what we're doing right now is we're working with our allies, with coalition partners, to look at how best Canada can continue to help militarily in substantive ways that offer real help in a way that is specifically lined up with our capacities as Canadians. We do some things better than just about anyone else in the world, and looking at our capacity to do that in smarter ways is exactly what Canadians asked me to do in the last election campaign.
If I can follow up on that, Prime Minister, Ashton Carter, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, wrote to your Defense Minister last week, as he's been writing to U.S. allies around the world, asking for more in the fight against ISIS. Did anything in that letter suggest a change in Canadian policy?
I have had, as you know, 3 or 4 good conversations with President Obama, and I've made it very clear that our commitment was to withdraw the 6 CF-18s. He didn't ask me to keep those in, nor would I have kept them in if he asked me. But what he wanted to know, and I was able to reassure him, is that Canada is going to stay a substantive and substantial member of the coalition against ISIS, including military engagement, probably around training, but we're working with our allies to ensure that we're doing something useful and we're not leaving them in a lurch.
I believe Cynthia's got another question from a member of the audience. Cynthia?
Yes, I do. We'll get back to social media in just a moment, but right now I have Brianna Fayad, who has a question for you.
Hello, Mr. Trudeau. So,
Brianna.
do you plan on canceling Canada Post's community mailbox service project, despite the fact that it saves them $100 million annually, or do you plan on reinstating the project?
What I plan on doing is doing something that should have been done a long time ago, which is actually speak with Canadians about what they expect from home mail delivery. As we see the world moving on towards greater use of email and courier parcels and packages, there is some legitimate questions to be asked around the service that Canadians expect from Canada Post. What we've committed to doing is to do a serious examination of what kind of service they have, and our commitment during the election campaign was to stop the transfer towards community mailboxes where it is, because there wasn't adequate consultation. But we understand Canadians expect Canada Post to deliver a service, and that's what we need to make sure that we're doing. How that service gets delivered is exactly what the review and consultation process that we're going to engage in will be focused on.
Thank you. Cynthia, I believe you got another question.
Yes, I do. This is Manjeet. Hello.
Hello.
What is your question?
Okay, my question, Prime Minister, 85% of Canadians live in cities, and yet our cities' hands are tied, especially from the perspective of power and revenue base, to actually become the innovative and resilient hubs that they need to be, in economic engines, and also provide social resiliency for all of the communities that live in them. So what would you do to ensure that our cities thrive and can compete at a global level, but also include the voices of the citizens who actually live in cities through a deliberative process to shape them, since except for the people, what is a city?
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree, and it's interesting because when Canada was conceived and created as a constitutional entity, or as a dominion anyway, almost 150 years ago, the rural urban balance was 80% rural, 20% urban. Now that's completely flipped, as you point out, but we have the same constitutional structure as was established 150 years ago. So what we need to do now, without reopening the Constitution, because I'm not going there, is to build a much better partnership with the cities, because as you point out, cities are drivers of innovation, they're clusters of creativity and arts and economic success and opportunity, while at the same time there are communities in rural and remote areas across the country who need to continue to be able to be successful. So getting that balance right is really, really important. That's why one of the things that we've engaged in significantly is better collaboration, better partnerships with the big city mayors, and working a lot directly with the provinces on municipal issues. And we're going to continue to make sure that instead of sloughing off responsibilities to different levels of government, recognizing that cities, for example, deliver 60% of services on about 8 to 11% of tax revenue. Understand that we're all serving the same citizens, and cities and those clusters that they represent generate a tremendous amount of economic growth and activity, and are certainly essential for the coming success of all Canadians, including Canadians in rural areas. So getting that balance right within the existing structure simply means a lot more collaboration, cooperation, and respect. But I will point out that our $20 billion commitment towards public transit is going to be something that by necessity gets focused on the big cities, because the public transit needs of rural and remote communities simply aren't of the same scale or neighborhood as what we need in terms of building light rail or subways or more sea buses in Vancouver. I mean, these are things that are necessary to create both productivity and quality of life increases for Canadians.
Okay, let's keep going. Cynthia, what's the next question?
Yes, I have Maria Jacko here with me now.
Prime Minister Trudeau, I'd first like to say thank you for meeting with NWAC this morning and other national Indigenous organizations. As she said, my name is Maria Jacko, and I am the aunt of Maisie Ojik, who's 16 years old. She went missing with her friend Shannon Alexander over 7 years ago from our community of Kittick-on-Zibi, Quebec, which is an hour and a half north of here. They went missing without a trace, and we have no answers right now. So I would like to thank you for saying that this is a priority for your government, and I would like to thank you for initiating this national inquiry. That, for me, I'm very grateful for that, so thank you from the bottom of my heart. Being a family member, I know how hard it is. I know how much time we take. I know how much money and how much of our mentality and how much it costs us to look for our loved ones, for our missing and murdered loved ones. So I want to ask you, I want your reassurance that families will remain at the forefront, and that each of the 1,181 missing and murdered Indigenous women, each of their cases are specifically looked at and given a chance to be fairly solved and stuff, because we definitely need answers. Like for me, with my niece, like some days I think she's here still. It's been 7 years and we have no answers, and it's really taken a toll on our families. So.
First of all, thank you, Maria, for sharing Maisie's story and for being here today to continue to call for action. The ongoing tragedy that has been going for more than 30 years across this country needs to be addressed. That's why we've called for a national public inquiry, but we've also recognized that even as we set up the national public inquiry, we have to fold in voices of families, voices of organizations and communities that have been looking for answers for a long time, and making sure that we set up a proper, broad engagement, inquiry, and consultation is going to be essential to make sure that we give justice to the victims, healing to the families, and mostly put an end to this tragedy. And I certainly hope to be able to find answers in your case and so many others. But what is most essential is that this is something that we do together, that we recognize together is not just a problem in Indigenous communities, but it's a Canadian problem that we shall address together. Miigwech.
It was striking in your mandate letters to all of your ministers that you mentioned a new relationship with First Nations in every letter to every minister. Why that broad?
Because you can't just expect the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs to deal with something that is, and she's going to be doing amazing work, but this really requires a whole of government approach. Whether you're talking about talking to defense about Indigenous Canadians in the military and specific challenges they have, whether you're talking about healthcare, whether you're talking about natural resources, whether you're talking about finance, whether you're talking about labor and training, whether you're talking about heritage and Indigenous languages and culture, whether you're talking about, I mean, you can run through every single department, and this has become, as was highlighted in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, not just an Indigenous issue, it's a Canadian issue. And the one thing that, I have to admit this, when I was originally thinking back about stepping into politics back in 2006, I remember having some conversations with sort of friends and future advisors about the things that needed to be done in Canada. And one of the senses we have is, oh my God, we have to build a right relationship with Indigenous Canadians. And the sense that we had back in 2006 was, it's a nice thought, but there's no political capital in there. There's no desire by Canada to address this at this point. And one of the things that we've seen over the past years is a tremendous will by non-Indigenous Canadians to get this right. I mean, Canadians like to think of ourselves as a fair, open country that has all sorts of rights respected and examples to give the world, and we're happy and proud of our image to the world. Well, there's a biblical parable about taking care of the beam in your own eye before you go to your neighbor's moat. And we have a large number of Canadians, the very first Canadians, who are living in third world conditions across this country. And it is time, and Canadians know that it is time to fix what has been centuries of a failed relationship. Despite moments of tremendous goodwill and desire to engage with it, it just hasn't been possible to move forward. And I want Canada to be able to engage in a respectful, renewed relationship that focuses on the kind of partnership, cooperation, collaboration, and shared stewardship of this land that was present from the way the first European settlers were welcomed by people who'd been here for millennia and who knew how to thrive in a place that has winters that are too long, too cold, too dark, with too much space between communities. I mean, there is an urgent need to get this right, and that's exactly what we're going to do, all of us.
This is a conversation on these issues that I'm sure we'll be pursuing in many ways in the years ahead. In the meantime, I know that Cynthia's got more questions from social media and from the big internet. Cynthia?
That's right. We're going to take a completely different direction now. This could possibly be the toughest question you're going to face here today.
I know you're saying that jokingly, but these questions are the toughest for me.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I showed it. No, it wasn't that the question. That was the question they asked during the campaign.
No,
Am I ready? How do people feel?
This is from a Facebook reader in Winnipeg who wants to know, what's with those shoes you wear even if they don't match your pants? Are they your lucky shoes?
Shoes. See, again, most difficult shit. Now, Paul had one point remarked that I wore ridiculous footwear from time to time, but I have grown up since then. And I do like my socks, but I give no thought to my shoes. I have black shoes, I have brown shoes, and I wear them until they wear out and I get a new pair. I really don't spend as much time thinking about it as apparently the internet does. See, tough question.
Maybe not the last one this afternoon. Cynthia, I believe you got a question for the Prime Minister of your own.
I do. It's regarding Donald Trump. And we also have a viewer who, an Oakville reader, will you stand up to Donald Trump and condemn his hateful rhetoric? But I'm going to add to that with my own question. You're basking in your post-election win, and 1 year from now, America will have a new president. Polls suggest that Donald Trump is surging in popularity. What do you think of his politics? What would you say if you could sit down and talk to him?
First of all, I think it's extremely important that someone in my position doesn't engage in the electoral processes of another country. So I'm certainly going to be very cautious about engaging in this particular topic, just because I think it's going to be important for Canadians, for Canadian jobs, for Canadian prosperity, to be able to have a positive relationship with whoever Americans choose as their president. However, I don't think it comes as a surprise to anyone that I stand firmly against the politics of division, the politics of fear, the politics of intolerance or hateful rhetoric. I stood clearly against that in the Charte des Valeurs, divisive issues put forward by the former Premier of Quebec. I took a very strong stand against the previous governments playing dangerous games with veils and citizenship issues. I think Canada, and indeed any modern society, does best when we understand that diversity is a source of strength, not a source of weakness, that the elements on which we are similar are always far greater than the elements on which we are diverse. And if we allow politicians to succeed by scaring people, we don't actually end up any safer. Fear doesn't make us safer, it makes us weaker. And at this time, when there is reason to be concerned for security around the world and here at home, we need to remain focused on keeping our communities safe and keeping our communities united instead of trying to build walls and scapegoat communities that, I mean, to talk directly about the Muslim community, they are predominantly, they are the greatest victims of terrorist acts around the world at the present time. And painting ISIS and others with a broad brush that extends to all Muslims is not just ignorant, it's irresponsible.
On that note, I think we've got another question from the audience. Cynthia?
We did. I would like to introduce you to Colum Grove White. Hello.
Hi there, Prime Minister Trudeau. Your government's committed to having this last election be the last election of using first past the post, and you said you're going to strike a all-party committee to explore different options. My question to you is, why is voting reform so important to you, and why is it important that 2015 was the last election using first past the post?
I think one of the things that we saw over the past years is declining voter turnout as people feel that less and less their votes matter, that they can actually affect real change. And one of the things that we committed to in this election was to engage Canadians in active politics once again. And one of the things that I look at as the greatest success of the electoral campaign was that voter turnout went up. That Canadians engaged in our political process again in greater numbers than before. And I think that's a victory for all of us. It's a victory against the kind of cynicism that too often drives politics. But I've met and heard from far too many Canadians who are frustrated that they don't feel like their votes count. They don't feel like they have a concrete way of making a difference in our electoral process. And I've committed to ensuring that we move beyond the first past the post system. Now, what that looks like, there's a number of different possibilities and alternatives out there, and some seem to work better for some parties than others. And you know, in any situation, there's going to be questioning about whether the government in place is just picking path that they think it might benefit themselves. I mean, what I am focused on, and what I want Canadians to focus on through these consultations and important discussions about electoral reform and democratic reform, are what kind of electoral process do we want to give us both the level of stability, the level of accountability, the level of diversity, the level of engagement and Canadian voices and choices that people feel they need to feel like their political system works for them. And I think that's an interesting and robust and important conversation to have. In a minority government situation or in a highly charged election campaign, things can get very intense. But I think in a reasonable, broad consultation that involves a whole bunch of people about, before we even talk about this specific types of electoral reform, what are the values that we want for how we choose our government? What kinds of governments do we want? Do we want a government that offers stability? Do we want a government that is more partisan or less partisan? Do we want a government that engages with broad numbers of voices? Do we want a government that tries to pull people together and be acceptable to the largest number of Canadians? Do we want to keep that bond between a specific MP and a specific group of Canadians? I mean, these are all important questions that lead us in different directions depending on our answers. And I think a mature democracy should be able to have a responsible, informed, and quite frankly, interesting discussion about how we pick the governments that bring us forward and prepare us for the future.
To proceed with that reform, do you think that your government needs to demonstrate support that's broader than the Liberal caucus in Parliament?
Oh, absolutely. I think we need to engage with Canadians, and I know the question is leaning towards, do we need a referendum on that? We've committed to consulting broadly as many Canadians as possible, as many different communities and organizations, including political parties, as possible, and we're going to move forward with that, and we'll see where it takes us. We're going to do that in a responsible way.
Okay. Cynthia, the next question, please.
Yes, I'm joined by Maddie Adams.
So my question today is, do you think your style of negotiating and soft power leadership are effective and sustainable in the long term? And how do you plan on making them work in an international setting among other leaders that may have a harder or more direct leadership?
Well, I think it's a mistake to equate understanding soft power with weakness. I think getting things done is absolutely essential, and to look at the contrast of the last election campaign, there was an incumbent party there that spent a lot of time talking about strength and tough and taking swings at all of its opponents and trying to show how strong they were. I took a very different approach that was much more inclusive, much friendlier, much more focused on listening and engaging and solving problems rather than creating conflict. And Canadians responded very positively to that. Now, why would citizens in the international community be any different? Let's take an example of the country of origin labeling issue that has been festering for a while between Canada and the United States, which has been costing Canadian farmers, specifically pork and beef producers, millions of dollars because the Americans were imposing unfair sanctions. We were ready very much and are ready to impose retaliatory measures, and we're justified to do that if the Americans don't fix it. But because we presented a very firm case, but at the same time, I brought it up directly with President Obama a few times and said, look, we need to engage. Well, right now, Americans are generally feeling slightly more positively inclined towards Canada than they might have been in the past, where Canadian foreign policy consisted of, telling Americans what pipelines they needed to approve of or else, never explaining what the else might be. We're actually moving forward substantively on issues. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to always get along with the Americans or our allies on every issue, but it does mean we should be able to sit down and have substantive, reasonable conversations about how to create prosperity in our economies, how to keep our citizens safe and how to have productive engagements with the world. So I don't see being smart and reasonable in how we engage with others as a sign of weakness. It was Wilfrid Laurier who actually pointed out that making concessions and finding compatibility and compromise is actually a more difficult thing to do than sitting on your position and refusing to take any comers on. To learn how to listen and to get to yes is more challenging, but ultimately much more satisfying and productive.
Prime Minister, one of the things we've noticed as we've gathered questions from across the country is that a lot of people are preoccupied not with the process of how things go in Parliament, but how government policy really affects them in their day-to-day lives and their making progress for them and their families. And I believe that the next question from Cynthia and a member of the audience is that kind of question.
Prime Minister, I'd like you to introduce you to Larry Agbana.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister.
Hello, Larry.
Hi. The TFSC has been an important savings tool for the lower income and medium income families in Canada. With the reduction coming with the contribution limits, how does your government intend to assist families with building savings and strengthening their financial security?
That's a great question, Larry. Thank you very much. The tax-free savings account was brought in a few years ago by the Conservative government and set at a $5,000 limit. And it was indeed, as you point out, a vehicle that a lot of Canadians have used to help save for future needs or for their retirement. Last year, the government decided to double the maximum savings account amount to $10,000 for the tax-free savings account. What we found was only 6% of Canadians were maximizing those savings at the $10,000 level. And quite concretely, of all the people I've talked to across the country, there's not a lot of Canadians who have $10,000 at the end of the year that they can put into a tax-free savings account. That's just beyond the scope of what so many Canadians are able to do. So we said, you know what, the $5,500 limit is perfectly reasonable as a tool, as an encouragement. But throughout our campaign, we've been focused on giving help to those who need it and giving less help to those who don't. So one of the things that we're very much focused on in encouraging people to save is actually strengthening the Canada Pension Plan. Because we know that provinces like Ontario and others are looking to strengthen it because retirement security is more and more difficult for people. We know that the average 35-year-old today sets aside less than half of what their parents saved at that same age when they were there. So we have a problem with saving for retirement, and we need to create ways that are accessible for a broad number of people, and that's why we're going to be working with the provinces to strengthen the Canada Pension Plan, and why we believe in TFSAs, but we believe in making them useful to the broadest number of people and not rewarding wealthiest people with tax-free savings, because that money could be better spent by the government on helping the people who actually need it most.
Okay. We've got another question from Twitter. Cynthia?
Yes, we do. Back to social media. And this is a tweet that just came in the last few minutes. It is from Justin Frederick. And he asks you, should there be a federal minimum wage like NDP leader Tom Mulcair was proposing during the campaign?
One of the things that was interesting about that proposal is that we, when it was discussed in the House, we certainly weren't opposed to it. It's just not what the NDP pretended it was. Federal minimum wage doesn't apply to 99% of people making minimum wage in this country because it's set by the provinces. Now, people working in the airline industry, in banks, in telecommunications would be affected by minimum wage, but not many of them are making the minimum wage. So the NDP points out that, oh, it's a symbol that should encourage the provinces to raise the minimum wage. Well, I think that's a conversation that we should be having with the provinces, and that certainly is something to reflect upon. But I don't think that pretending you're going to raise the minimum wage for everyone across the country, when in fact you're not going to be able to do that, was a particularly responsible kind of campaign to be running, and that's why we certainly didn't engage in that type of politics.
Monsieur le Premier ministre, si vous voulez bien, je vais passer la parole
Prime Minister, I'd like to hand the floor over to my colleague Alec Castonguay. There are a number of francophones who wanted to chime in. Robert Cuisson, a constituent, wants to know how the government came up with $1 billion to resettle Syrian refugees, whereas there are thousands, millions of homeless Canadians, millions of Canadians that don't get enough food. Well, listen, it's a false choice. Canada has always understood that welcoming those who are living in distress across the world is a benefit for our country. For example, the Ismailis that arrived in the 1990s from Uganda, from East Africa, that have contributed significantly to our economy, to the Asian populations that came in the 80s and 90s that have contributed to the wealth and richness of our society. And I know deep in my heart that resettling these Syrian refugees is indeed an investment at the outset. But it is also a matter of demonstrating the kind of country that we are, a welcoming country, and it's also in our interest to welcome those from abroad who are going to contribute to the economic vitality of all of our communities in future years. Now, if at the same time as resettling these refugees, we can underscore the crying needs when it comes to affordable housing across Canada, the dire needs of children living in poverty, issues affecting Indigenous communities. This is a dialogue that we need to engage in. When we resettle Syrians, well, they'll find that it's hard to find affordable housing and that we need to invest in affordable housing. So to my mind, this act of welcoming is a golden opportunity to reflect on how we may best provide the same opportunities to all Canadians. I think it's a tremendous principle, and I'd like to thank Robert for mentioning this.
On security and related issues comes from another member of our audience, and Cynthia's got that question now.
Yes, I'd like to introduce you to Judith Lewis.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Good afternoon, Judith.
My preoccupation recently has been with civil liberties. As a citizen of Canada, I never questioned until recently whether they were 100% secure. I'm not convinced. Please give me some hope. Thanks.
Well, thank you, and I entirely understand that. I've heard from many Canadians who are expressing those twin concerns of wanting to be safe in a world that we see on the nightly news all too regularly is increasingly insecure in many ways, but at the same time to know that our rights and freedoms and privacy is also being protected. And people, quite frankly, expect that their governments be able to do both of those together. There shouldn't be a contradiction between what it takes to keep us safe and what it takes to keep us Canadian, free and defend our rights. So a responsible government should make sure that when you're giving more powers to police or security agencies in order to keep people safe, that at the same time you bring in more oversight. You bring in more limits to ensure that those new powers aren't being overused or even abused. And that's why we've committed to do what all of our Five Eyes allies of UK, US, New Zealand, and Australia have done, which is bring in a committee of parliamentarians to oversee all the actions of our national security agencies so that we can have elected representatives from all parties of Canadians to ensure not just that our investigative bodies and police agencies aren't abusing people's rights, but also to make sure that those agencies are doing everything they possibly can to keep Canadians safe. That's the balance. And the thing that sort of bugged me a little bit in the past election campaign is it was very much playing up the politics of fear. On one side, we had a party saying, you know, if we don't do this, then if you're not willing to strengthen our security agencies, well, then you want terrorists to win. And we should be afraid there are terrorists behind every leaf and rock. Well, that obviously doesn't apply. But on the flip side of saying suddenly, if these measures go through, Canada's going to all of a sudden be a police state, is also a kind of politics of fear that, quite frankly, I reject. Because again, fear doesn't keep us safe. What keeps us safe is responsible checks and balances and a defending of our Constitution and Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that's very much what Canadians expect us to focus on, and that's exactly what I'm going to be focused on.
Prime Minister, we've got another one of those tough questions for you from the young gentleman in the front row here.
I bet Paul didn't warn you we had a secret weapon.
Excellent.
And his name is Isaac, and he's 8 years old. And Isaac has a very important question for you.
Is the Star Wars The Force Awakens as good as Harrison Ford says it is?
I don't know what Harrison Ford said about it, but I can tell you it is as good as I had hoped it was. It was, I was your age when I first saw Star Wars, and like every one of my generation, or everyone I knew of my generation anyway, I think maybe I just hung out with geeks, but it was a life-changing movie, and I am very confident that this this new iteration of it is going to make everybody very, very happy.
And perhaps on that note, we'll begin to wrap things up. As you head into the holiday season, do you see the next 2 weeks, now that the House is up, as a chance to drive forward your agenda even further, or are you going to take some family time?
If I don't start taking some family time, I'm going to be in real trouble, not just with my family, but I'll be in real trouble because one of the most important things about this job is to stay connected with why you're doing this job. It's easy to get wrapped up in, oh, what question is Paul going to ask me next? Or, you know, what are the opposition parties saying? Or what's going to be on the front page tomorrow? I mean, there's so much that is urgent around you all the time that if you just focus on that, you can forget about what's important. So for me, what's important is remembering that I'm doing this job not in spite of the 8-year-old, 6-year-old, and 2-year-old that I have at home, but because of the 8-year-old, the 6-year-old, the 2-year-old I have at home. I'm doing this because I want our kids to have a brighter future, and I feel I can do some things meaningfully that will move us along in the right direction, and making sure that I take time to you know, to offer myself as a punching bag for Xavier's karate lessons, or marvel at Ella's gymnastic classes, or help Zav with his math, or even just sort of sit back and watch our third child, who's very much a third child, Hadrian, be completely independent and not need mommy or daddy nearly as much, well, not need daddy anyway, as much as I might like. That's what really matters for me, and my capacity to take a little time with them over the holidays, and quite frankly, to encourage my ministers. You know, everyone talked about the dynamic nature of our new cabinet, 30 extraordinary ministers that represent 50 children, 50 kids amongst our cabinet, and reminding them that after having worked incredibly hard for 2 months to get this government up and running with the kind of energy that I think we were able to demonstrate, it's really important for them to take some time with their families over the holidays, over Christmas, to resource, to recharge, because quite frankly, you folks ain't seen nothing yet. We got a lot more to do in the coming months and years.
I think we'll stop there. Thank you very much for this extraordinary exercise of coming out to meet with voters. We got a lot of messages from people who don't live in Ottawa who are quite upset that you're stuck in the Ottawa bubble here. So maybe at some future point down the road, we could take this show on the road and have a town hall somewhere in Eastern Canada, Western Canada.
I look forward to it, and actually I'm going to be doing that sort of thing more and more often, getting out of the bubble, but understanding there's a lot of good people in Ottawa who aren't part of the bubble, who deserve to be listened to as well, is a part of it, and getting out and staying connected is the heart of what's going to be
Thanks
our
very
success.
much, Prime Minister, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Paul.